Welcome to Who is God and What Does He Want? An optimistic, conversational, thought-provoking commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans. My hope is that you'll gain a better understanding of the New Testament and be encouraged in your daily living. Now, here's today's conversation. We're in the book of Romans now, Peggy. We started that last week, and we're going to continue in chapter 1. And this is, I was telling the folks before I started the recorder that this is probably the hardest passage to teach in the New Testament, not because it's so difficult or complicated, but because it's extremely controversial today in the church because it deals with same-sex relationships. And that's a very powerful thing, no matter which side of it you're on or in the middle or whatever, and we'll talk about that some. It's become more accepted, and I just say there's greater flexibility about it in our culture and even in the church than there was 50 years ago. Good, bad, right, or wrong, that's just where it's gone. So you have denominations like the Episcopal Church and the American Baptists and a few others who have become very tolerant of same-sex relationships. They don't promote them particularly, but they don't reject people who are in those relationships, and they want them to come in, be a part of the church if they love God, and they don't try to micromanage their lives. They go, this is between you and God, and we're glad you're here and we love you. It doesn't mean everyone joins them in it, but there's just a greater tolerance with some Christians, and others are less tolerant of same-sex relationships, and they need to be because it's what they were taught or it's what they really believe. So I don't see anything wrong with that, depending on how they treat people. But even that's up to them. So anyway, you know the controversy in society today, and particularly in the church. It's a really kind of a divisive thing, and so I'm going to do my best to try to work through this and be as accurate as I can be and honest and fair-minded and all that stuff. And even when you try all that, trust me, somebody won't be happy with you. In fact, the more fair-minded and really work hard at listening to everybody and try to be gracious you are, the more people on the extremes don't like you at all. So it's sometimes very lonely in the middle. But we'll work through it tonight because this is what's here. This is what's written. So I want to start back in verse 16. We really left off starting at 18, but let's go back just to pick up 16. You remember the whole first part of the first chapter was kind of an introduction, and I'm praying for you guys, and the word is spread throughout the known Roman Empire that people like you have these things going on with your faith, and I'm encouraged by it. I pray for you, you pray for me, all that kind of personal stuff. And it was really pretty good stuff, actually. It's not super doctrinal. It might not be quite as much to discuss, but it kind of lays the groundwork of who Paul is, who these people are in Rome, and his disposition toward them. So in verse 16, he kind of gives a summary of not only what he just said about the gospel being about Jesus, who was the Son of God and the Messiah and the anointed one and the one that's promised to come and save the world and all that. But it's also 16 and 17 are kind of also his overview of the whole book in a way. He says, "For I am not ashamed of this good news about Christ," which he just talked about. You'd have to go back and look if you missed last week. This good news, or a gospel, that's what the word gospel means. A lot of translations have the word gospel, but it just means good news. This good news is the power of God at work, saving everyone who believes, the Jew first and also the Gentile. Doesn't mean Jews are more important. It's just that it came to them first. And then the Gentiles, the non-Jews, started to get the message through Paul. But this is an interesting way, the way he says it. The good news is the power of God at work. So that good news message goes out and it does its work. It's the announcement. I think I mentioned that last week. The good news doesn't mean It's not a threat. You better do something or you're going to be in trouble, mister. It's not even an offer. Hey, I'm offering you guys a deal here. Let's make a deal. The word for good news, the evangel in the Greek, means announcement. So this good news announcement, it's announcing something. That is the power of God at work through that message, saving everyone who believes. Now, it's very tempting, depending on how you've been raised, to plug into that word saving as not going to hell, because that's how we think of salvation. We've all been conditioned to think when you see the word save, it means you won't go to hell forever. But that word doesn't mean that. It just means to deliver. It doesn't have any attachment to any particular situation now or later. It's the general word for deliver. So really saying this good news is the power of God at work when that message goes out and tells about Jesus being the Messiah and the promised one to deliver everyone who believes. And it's not a reward for believing. It's not like if you don't believe, I'm going to do something bad to you, and if you do believe, I'll do something good. When you believe, what happens is you're engaging with God. How else can you engage with God unless you believe? And so when you engage with God by believing, you're going to be delivered from the entanglement of sin in this life, at least that. Whether there's something happening past this life is another question, and maybe he'll get to that. But you really can't get any more out of this verse than just what it says, that this good news is at work delivering people who believe, to the Jews first and also the Gentile. And then he goes on and says this good news, this announcement, tells us how God makes us right in his sight. In other words, the way he views us, what he sees us doing, this good news tells how God views us and sees us right in his perception of us. This is accomplished from start to finish by faith. In other words, faith is the vehicle by which we know God and engage with him, and it's the way in which God views us and sees us, trusting him, living for him, all those things. Not that you earn anything by doing those, but that you are doing them, and you're gaining from them, and you're being delivered from, all the entanglement of sin in this life. So it's accomplished through faith from start to finish. As the scripture says, and this is from Habakkuk, it is through faith that a righteous person has life. That's how you experience life and the abundant life and things going well and having a relationship with God is through faith. Because think about it. If you don't have faith in God, you're not going to have anything going on with him. How could you? Now, if you do have faith in God, it doesn't mean everything's going to be great and you are never going to have any doubts or anything like that, but at least you got something going on. So faith is this great thing that lets us engage with God and be connected to him, and hopefully in some spiritual, mystical way. And most people I talk to sense that. They go, it's more than just a bunch of things I believe, statements. Okay, I believe there's a God. I believe that this and that, like a doctrinal statement or a creed. There's more to it than that. There's something going on inside of you that you experience. And I think all people who are believers have some degree of that. I tend to be an engineer, and so I don't get a lot of spooky stuff, I call it, where you got these things happening and you feel these real strong convictions and everything. I'm a little more academic and logical, but I do feel things, but that's my end of the spectrum. Other people, I know they're very charismatic. They experience all the gifts. They speak in tongues. They do words of wisdom, and it's just got the whole package going on. And that's fine. I think everybody's different. Okay, so any thoughts on that before we go on to 18? That's just kind of what 16 and 17 were about. Does it make sense?
That makes complete sense.
Complete sense? Wow, I'm batting 1,000 here.
But you're really good at explaining things too, Carl, so that helps.
Okay, good. And what I tried to do, and notice what I tried to do, I tried to be careful not to read into it anything. I'm just saying it at least means that we have faith and engage with God, and it delivers us from problems in this life. And maybe you can conclude that there's something about this passage that has to do with eternity, with heaven and hell or whatever. But you don't get Paul explaining anything like that in this passage. In fact, you won't find anything in the book of Romans by Paul about you've got to believe in Jesus or you're going to go to hell forever. It doesn't come up. And you'll find as we work through it, Paul never gives that warning. But he gives all kinds of other warnings about believing and what happens if you don't. It's not that there's no warnings. It's not that it doesn't matter whether you believe or not. It's just that we attach these super dramatic, extreme, harsh things to the gospel and to God. And my opinion is that we have inherited this from Roman Catholicism, which we all kind of come out of, directly or indirectly. And that's what they did in the Middle Ages, just to bring fear into people's lives to control them. And so some of that still lingers today, I think. That's kind of my take on it. But you're going to find, as we work through this, you're not going to find Paul ever even mentioning the word hell. Never occurs in the New Testament, but even the word Gehenna, which people translate as hell, he never even mentions that. Jesus does, but Paul doesn't. And Paul doesn't in any of his letters. So it's kind of strangely missing. And another place it's missing, when you work through the book of Acts, which is all about missionary efforts and taking the good news out to everybody. Paul, nobody ever warns anybody, if you don't believe, you're going to go to hell forever. Never comes up. So it's strangely missing from the New Testament. You would think it's everywhere and just constantly being, but what that is that churches constantly bring it up and impose it on the text, and you hear it so much over and over, you think that's got to be in the Bible. I remember when I first started looking into this stuff, I had this thing in my head that God poured his wrath out on his son. I remember thinking that, I think that's a verse. So I went and looked it up. I couldn't find it because it wasn't there. And what had happened is I had heard that so many times as a kid growing up, I thought it was a Bible verse and it wasn't. So that can happen to you. You can get things in your head that are so familiar and so ingrained, it's got to be the truth, and it's got to be God, and it's got to be the Bible, and it might not be at all. Now, some of them are. There's plenty of things in our heads and in our hearts that have been placed there over the years that are really good things. I'd say most of it is. Okay, anything else on any of that before we jump into 18? Because it's going to get real interesting here real fast.
Hearing about this reminds me stuff you hear as a kid. Reminds me of when I was a kid. I used to always have to memorize John 3:16. My cousins thought it was cute whenever I'd memorize it.
Yeah.
Well, my older cousins, I should say.
You're not alone. That's a famous verse. They have it on they used to hang it up behind when they kicked the field goals, and they kind of kept them from doing that now. They always had it up there, and you memorize it, and it's a great verse, by the way. But what's odd is that nobody memorizes John 3:17, and it's just as important, and maybe even more key. It may be the key to that whole section passage of 16, 17, 18, and everything, because it says God didn't send his son into the world to condemn it. He sent him to save it. So that's kind of the overarching principle, is that God's mission, his purpose in coming into the world through his son, was to save the world, not to condemn it. Then, if you read on in 18, 19, somewhere in there, God says, men are condemned, people are condemned because he didn't say this, but it's obvious that they condemn themselves because they love darkness rather than light. And so I don't believe God comes into the world and says, okay, you guys condemn yourself by loving darkness, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pile on. I'm going to really give it to you because you are disobedient and you're sinful. Man, I'm really going to lay it. No, I think he comes into the world to double down and say, I want to save you all the more. You're so screwed up. You're so messed up. You love darkness rather than light. Instead of me getting mad at you, I love you. And I want to save you from that darkness. That's what I see in John 3:16, 17, and 18. But you can read it for yourself and see what you think. All right, let's go on to 18. Now, he kind of shifts gear, and this is really where his Romans letter starts. This was all introduction up to this part. And now he's going to dig in and start presenting the problem. Now, let me give you a big overview of the whole book of Romans. There's really 4 parts. I see 4 parts. Now, there might be more, but first, and it kind of makes sense, he presents the problem. He says, here's the problem, folks, sin. And he's going to go into all kind of details for about 3 chapters. Then, second part, he's going to say, I've got the solution for you. And he only spends half a chapter. Okay, not very long, because the solution's pretty simple. It's Jesus dying on the cross and taking away sin. Then he spends, let's see, chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. So that's like 8 chapters explaining the solution. Okay, so you got the problem, the solution for a half a chapter, the explanation of the solution. Now, it's really simple, but there's a lot of aspects of it and a lot of explanation needs to be done. And how does this work in our life? Then from 12 on, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, he gives the results of what should happen after you know what the problem is, you get the solution, and you understand it by explanation. Then you're ready to go do stuff like love people without hypocrisy. He starts giving you all these pieces of advice on how you can live. But he wants you to know the problem, the solution, the explanation of the solution, and understand it. Then you're ready to go do something. Okay, does that make sense? That's kind of what you'll see in the whole 16 chapters. And I'll mention that again throughout. But he's going to start out right now and give the problem. And this is just a couple of chapters, and it'll take us a few weeks. But he starts out and says, God shows his anger from heaven against all sinful, wicked people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Now, let me stop you there, because this is not a good translation. Because in the Greek, and if you look at other translations, it says God shows his anger. He reveals his anger from heaven against the ungodliness and sinfulness of men, not against the men themselves. And that's a little different. It's not us he hates. It's not us he might be mad at us the way you're mad at a child when they run out in the street, and you're upset and mad at them going, don't run out in the street, but you're mad at them because you love them. You don't want them to get hurt. And so that's what I see here. God shows his anger from heaven against our sinfulness, our wickedness, and all that crap that's hurting us. And yeah, there might be he's angry with us, but he's angry with us because he loves us. Do you see the difference? Rather than, how dare you sin, I'm going to give it to you. That would be a puny God. And he's not like that. He loves us, and he says, I'm not going to sit back and do nothing and go, I don't care, whatever you want to do. He's not like that. But he's also not the other extreme. How dare you sin? You've offended me. I'm going to let you have it. In fact, I'm going to torment you forever. That's the other extreme that I really don't think is who God is. But he does care about sin. He does care about what it does to us, and he does want to do something about it. Paul right now is just saying what the problem is. He's going to give the solution in a little bit. So God shows his anger from heaven against our sinfulness, our wickedness, our unrighteousness, because we suppress the truth in that sin and wickedness. We kind of suppress the truth that we know. Have you ever seen that in yourself or other people? They're so busy sinning, you just kind of block God out and go, I'm not going to think about or traffic in the area of the solution and truth because I'm so enjoying all this sin that's killing me. Isn't that weird? That we traffic in and get lost in the sin that's killing us because there is a stimulation in it. Our counselor friend here, Donna, can tell you that people betray themselves. They've sometimes come into counseling and go, I don't know why I do that. I'm miserable, but I keep doing it anyway. We really don't understand ourselves very well because we have a sinful nature that betrays us, and that's what we need to get saved from. It's really the sin. Now, like I said, he might be angry with us the way you would with somebody you love that's not living their life well, and you go, my friend or my child, I don't want you living like that. So I am kind of angry that you're trafficking in that, but it's really your sin that I hate, not you. Okay, they know these people who suppress the truth in their sin and wickedness, which we all do to some degree, they know the truth about God because he made it obvious to them. Okay, everybody knows there's a God. Everybody knows who God is, even if they say they're atheists. Like they say, there's no atheists in foxholes. Hey, listen, when the Twin Towers came down in New York, for 9/11, all those people that got trapped in the rubble, and there were a lot of them, they didn't all die right away. Some of them just had to lay there and die slowly. It's tragic. It's horrible. But I doubt there was anybody crying out to philosophy or evolution, whether it's true or not, or anything else. The only one you can cry out to at that point is God. All of a sudden, you at least are an agnostic or a believer or want to be a believer, because not believing in God isn't going to get you anywhere. So there's something about getting in the desperation of life that at least turns you to the possibility of God, or turns you to him, and you go, wow, God, I've kind of known you've been there my whole life, but I've been so busy doing stuff I didn't have time for you. Now I do, because I'm not going anywhere and I'm trapped in this rubble. So I think a lot of people cried out to God and took care of some business there that they had not done their whole life. Possibly. I think so. They know the truth about God because he made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. True. Don't we look at the earth and sky and go, wow, look at that stuff up there? I mean, the ancients, they saw what we saw. They didn't understand it. They thought it was like a big shell with little holes in it and light beyond it. They didn't know it was stars out there. They just knew little twinkly lights, and then you got the moon and you got the sun. So you had stars, moon, and sun, and wow, that's really spectacular. Because of that created stuff, people have seen the earth and sky. It's obvious to them the truth about God. Now, what they understand about God is another thing, and I don't know if you know this, but there are very few atheists in the world. Most people are either believe in God, or they're Muslim, or they're Jews, or they're Christians. They all believe there's a God. They have different views about it, or they're even agnostic. But most people I talk to, they're agnostic, go, it seems like there's some higher power. So it's like almost everybody senses there's got to be something more. They just don't know what it is. Very few people are pure atheists and believe there's nothing beyond this material world. That's a really tough lift. Intellectually, because there's so much evidence that there's got to be more, to me anyway, and to most people. Have you discovered that in other people, that even people who aren't believers kind of go, man, there's got to be something going on, I just don't know what it is? Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature. So they have no excuse for not knowing God. Now this is interesting. Through what God has created and what he made, people can clearly see what's invisible. How do you clearly see something that's invisible? Well, because you see it indirectly. Through God, what God has made, you clearly see his invisible, you can't see them directly, qualities, his eternal power, his power that's there forever, his divine nature, that there's something about him that's above and beyond us. And so therefore, because they actually clearly see this, whether they admit it or not, or even if they're not fully aware of it, they do see it. There's really no excuse for saying there's no God. So atheists, they really don't have a very good case. I think you see this in yourself, and you look around and, some days you go, there's so much evil and awful stuff in this world. God, where are you? But then you stop and go, wait a minute, but there's so much here, and there's so much beauty, and there's so much amazing things and miraculous things and relationships and people that can do figure skating and do these amazing artistic things and play music. And man, there's so much creativity. Somebody had to create all this. So it's kind of a dilemma for all of us. Yes, verse 21, and interrupt anytime you got some ideas or thoughts, because we can stop.
I have some actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Talking about atheism reminds me of a story. Christian singer Olivia Lane was an atheist until she saw Jesus in her living room. on 429:18. If you listen to her song "Woman at the Well," she pretty much explains this. But she had an empty bottle of wine, and then she saw Jesus in her living room, and he turned that wine to living water and taught her how to love again, as the song says.
Well, it could be. I wasn't there.
Yeah, no, she's in Nashville, but if you listen to the song, she explains it better than I could.
Okay, well, that's an encouraging song, and that could have happened. Then again, it might just be a song, but it's interesting. But it kind of fits in. We all know there's a God deep in our hearts, because you look around and it really tips the scale. Okay, there's got to be a God. I don't know what he's like, but man, this didn't happen by itself. So they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And this is quite typical. People kind of know there's a God. They go about their lives and everything. And I don't think God's all that ticked off about it. He goes, well, they're humans, My little kids didn't just adore me every minute. They were often selfishly playing, with their toys and stuff. And it's okay. I didn't mind. They didn't have to be focused on me every second. But human beings don't worship God as God, many of them, all of us to some degree, or even thank him. Just say, hey, God, thanks. Thanks for all this. Just thank him. I don't think he wants a lot out of us, except he wants us to have a good life and have eternal life and everything. But I don't think he's going, come on, you got to worship me every second. He's going, hey, have a good life. I'm here. I want to experience it with you. I want you to experience it with me. Just give me thanks. Just say, hey, thanks, God. And even if you don't thank me, I'm still going to love you. I mean, that's the kind of God he is. He says, even if you don't thank me, don't worship me, I still love you. My love is not conditioned. Thank you for watching this presentation of the Common Sense Commentary Series. Remember, God loves you more than you will ever know, and he will never leave or forsake you. Just put your trust in him. If you have a question or a comment, you can contact me atccliftonjones.com. That'sccliftonjones.com. Now, go and enjoy your daily walk with God.